Clara had always believed that love was quiet, dependable, and safe, and with Ethan, she had found exactly that, a partner who knew her every habit, every fear, every dream, and yet never judged, never faltered, and never left. He had been there through her darkest nights, holding her hand when her world felt too heavy, celebrating her small victories with uncontainable pride, and somehow, in his constant presence, she had learned to trust that love could be steady, even when life was unpredictable. But on that rainy evening, the world she thought she knew began to shift when her friends invited her to a gallery opening, a small, intimate event filled with unfamiliar faces, dim lighting, and the scent of fresh paint and varnish mingling in the air, and it was there, standing beside a vivid abstract painting that seemed to move as she looked at it, that she first noticed Daniel, a man with eyes that caught the light in a way that made her pause, whose laughter seemed to echo directly into her chest, who spoke with a warmth and intensity that made the conversations she had rehearsed in her mind with Ethan feel distant and almost mechanical. And even as she tried to remind herself of Ethan's unwavering love, she felt a pull she hadn't recognized before, a curious, restless stirring that made her heart beat faster than it should. And when Daniel handed her a small sketch he had drawn of her, carefully detailed, capturing a side of her she didn't often show to anyone, Clara felt a strange mix of delight and guilt, the kind that prickles the skin and sits heavy in the chest, because she knew she should have been flattered and polite, thanked him, and moved on, but she couldn't, not really. And so she smiled in a way that felt both natural and unearned, a little breathless, and for the first time in a long time, she felt alive with curiosity, the kind that whispers promises of something new, something unknown, something thrilling. And yet even as she lingered near the paintings, listening to Daniel speak about color, form, and light, trying to keep her voice calm and casual, she felt the weight of her own loyalty pressing down, a reminder that Ethan had planned a weekend trip for them, that he trusted her, that he believed in the bond they shared, and this knowledge gnawed at her conscience even as her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel's smile, the way he tilted his head when he listened, the subtle warmth in his tone that made her pulse quicken. And as the night drew on, the gallery closing its doors and sending the last few guests into the cold drizzle outside, Clara walked to her car, the sketch carefully tucked into her bag, and felt a confusing mix of excitement and fear, a sense that something inside her had awakened in a way she hadn't expected, a fluttering ache that spoke of choices she had never faced before. And while she drove home in the quiet rain, watching droplets race across the windshield, she tried to shake the feeling, telling herself that Ethan was her anchor, that she loved him more than fleeting moments of thrill, yet every time she closed her eyes, Daniel's laughter echoed in her mind, bright and untethered, and she knew, with a sinking, thrilling certainty, that her heart had just encountered a spark it couldn't ignore, a spark that could light her up or burn everything she had built. And as she pulled into her driveway, she sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the rain-soaked streetlights, realizing that the choice between comfort and desire, loyalty and curiosity, had just become painfully real, and that no matter what she told herself, no matter how tightly she held on to Ethan's love, she could not deny the stirrings inside her, the dangerous, beautiful pull towards something unpredictable, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't known she craved. And so Clara finally stepped out of the car, umbrella in hand, heart heavy with guilt and light with possibility, and walked toward the warm glow of her home, knowing that this night had changed everything. That life had quietly shifted on its axis, and that she had begun a journey she could neither control nor easily forget. Days passed after the gallery, but Clara couldn't shake the image of Daniel from her mind. Every time she sipped her morning coffee, his laughter echoed in her thoughts. Every time she walked through the park, she imagined the way he had tilted his head to listen. And though Ethan had been nothing but loving, kind, and attentive, the familiar rhythm of their life together suddenly felt muted, almost predictable, as if the comfort she had once cherished had dulled her senses to something she hadn't realized she needed. And so when Daniel called her one evening, suggesting a private showing at a small, hidden studio downtown, Clara's heart skipped, part of her screaming to resist, part of her longing for the thrill she couldn't name, and she agreed, telling herself it was just art, just curiosity. But from the moment she entered the warm, dimly lit space, filled with canvases that seemed to breathe the air thick with paint and possibility, she felt it again, that inexplicable pull, the fluttering tension that made her chest tighten and her thoughts scatter. And Daniel was there, smiling as though he had been expecting her. His presence bright and magnetic, drawing her into a conversation that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, easy, natural, yet charged with a quiet intensity that left her feeling both exhilarated and guilty. And as they moved from painting to painting, talking about colors, shadows, dreams, and fears, Kyla felt herself opening in ways she hadn't with anyone else, laughing at jokes she didn't remember thinking were funny, sharing stories she had only whispered to her journal. And though she told herself it was innocent, she could feel the line she was crossing with every glance, every shared laugh, every lingering moment, and she thought of Ethan, waiting at home, trusting her completely, planning their weekend trip. Unaware that his world of devotion was being quietly challenged by the sudden presence of someone new, and guilt clawed at her, a constant whisper in her chest reminding her of promises she had made, of love she had pledged. But desire and curiosity were relentless, pulling her deeper into the orbit of Daniel, into conversations that felt effortless, into a warmth that was intoxicating, and she knew that if she let herself linger too long, she might lose the ability to return to the simplicity of her life with Ethan. Yet in that moment, all caution felt impossible, all warnings muted, because she was experiencing a rush of life she hadn't realized she had been missing. And when Daniel leaned slightly closer to point out a detail in one of his sketches, Kyla's breath caught, the electricity of the gesture sparking in her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly noticed, in a way that was thrilling and terrifying all at once. And when the private showing ended, and Daniel offered to walk her to her car, the tension between them hummed silently in the air, a soft, undeniable pull, and Kyla wanted to resist, wanted to retreat to the safety and loyalty of her life with Ethan, but she found herself lingering, caught in a storm of emotions she couldn't name, unable to decide whether she was craving connection, excitement, or simply the feeling of being alive in a way that had faded in the steadiness of her love with Ethan. And as she drove home that night, rain streaking the windshield and city lights blurring into golden streaks, she thought of Ethan planning their weekend, his easy smile, his trust, and the ache of guilt pressed against the thrill she had just felt, a complicated, twisting sensation that left her both exhilarated and panicked. And over the next few days, the pull of Daniel continued to intrude on her every thought, a quiet storm beneath the surface of her calm life. And though she tried to focus on Ethan, on their plans, on the warmth of his steady love, she found herself replaying Daniel's laughter, his words, the way he had looked at her, feeling a mix of longing, fear, and excitement she had never felt before, until finally, the tension became unbearable, and she realized she was standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything, a choice between loyalty and desire, between the steady, safe love she had always known and the intoxicating, unpredictable pull of something new. And as she sat in her quiet apartment, sketch in hand, heart racing and conscience screaming, Kyla knew one thing with absolute clarity: nothing would ever feel the same again, and the quiet, comfortable world she had built with Ethan was now shadowed by the exhilarating, terrifying possibility of something she couldn't yet name, something that could either awaken her completely or shatter everything she held dear. The tension Kyla had been trying to ignore finally reached a breaking point when Ethan, sensing a change in her, asked her to sit and talk one quiet evening, his voice calm but filled with concern. And as she looked at him, at the familiar softness in his eyes, the warmth that had always made her feel safe, Kyla felt her chest tighten with a mix of fear, guilt, and longing, because in that moment she realized that her heart, which had been quietly drawn to Daniel, was now a battlefield, torn between the unwavering loyalty of a man who had stood by her through everything and the thrilling, unpredictable spark that Daniel had ignited. And Ethan asked gently if she had been feeling distant, if something was troubling her, and Kyla's throat tightened, the words she wanted to speak caught somewhere between truth and fear, because telling him about Daniel would hurt him in ways she couldn't bear, but keeping it secret felt like a slow betrayal, a shadow over the love she knew she should cherish. And she fumbled, trying to give him half-truths, small omissions she thought would protect him, but each word she spoke felt heavier, each pause louder, and Ethan's eyes searched hers, patient, loving, yet quietly wounded, and Kyla's mind raced, memories of Daniel flooding her thoughts, his laughter, the way he had looked at her in that private gallery, the warmth of his attention, the feeling of being truly noticed and desired in ways she hadn't realized she craved. And she hated herself for it, hated the pull she felt towards someone else when everything in her life with Ethan was steady, kind, and true, and as she sat there, the quiet of the apartment around them, the soft ticking of the clock marking every heartbeat, she realized that she was standing at a crossroads, and no matter what she said or didn't say, the choice she had been avoiding had to be faced, because lies, even small ones, had a way of creeping into hearts and eroding trust, and Ethan reached for her hand, a gesture so familiar, so safe, that it made the ache in her chest worse, because she loved him, deeply, more than she had allowed herself to admit recently, yet the spark she felt for Daniel whispered to her from the edges of her mind, a dangerous, alluring voice she couldn't silence, and Clara's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to breathe, the weight of her secret pressing down, making her feel small, exposed, and terribly human, and in that moment, she realized that love wasn't simple, wasn't just about comfort or excitement, it was about choices, about the courage to face the consequences of your heart, about honesty, and she knew she had failed herself, had failed Ethan, even as she loved him, and the conflict within her became unbearable, a storm of emotion that left her trembling, unsure if she could continue pretending that everything was fine, and Ethan, sensing the walls she had built, leaned closer, his voice steady but filled with quiet hurt, asking if she was truly happy, if there was something she hadn't told him, and Clara's chest ached with the truth she couldn't fully speak, because admitting it would shatter the trust he had placed in her, yet remaining silent was a betrayal, and the silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, until finally, the tension became too much, and Clara excused herself, retreating to the sanctuary of their bedroom, closing the door behind her as tears fell freely, the sound of Ethan's quiet concern outside the door making her heart break even more, because she loved him, she truly did, but the pull toward Daniel had become undeniable, a silent, persistent storm in her heart, and lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, she thought of every moment with Daniel, every word, every smile, every small gesture that had felt like a secret promise, and she realized with a pang of fear and longing that she had crossed an invisible line, that the spark she had tried to dismiss had grown into a flame that could not easily be contained, and the weight of her choices pressed on her, heavy and unrelenting, because she knew that if she continued to avoid the truth, if she continued to hide behind lies and half-truths, she would lose more than she could ever recover, and yet the thought of facing Daniel and Ethan, telling one of them the truth, terrified her, left her paralyzed, because the consequences were unknown, and in that quiet, darkened room, Clara understood fully that love was never simple, never neat, it was messy, complicated, filled with desire, loyalty, guilt, and longing, and that the path ahead would require courage she didn't know if she possessed, and she clenched her hands, trying to steady herself, feeling the ache of her heart split between two worlds, knowing that the moment she made a choice, or admitted the truth, everything would change forever, and as sleep eluded her, as the hours ticked by in silence, Clara realized that the storm inside her heart had only just begun, that the quiet life she had built with Ethan was now fragile, and that the thrilling, dangerous pull of Daniel had become a force she could no longer ignore, and she understood with painful clarity that she was standing at the edge of a decision that could either heal or destroy everything she had loved, and that night, lying awake, she felt the weight of the impossible choice pressing down, a reminder that love, in all its beauty, was also the hardest thing to navigate, a mixture of desire, loyalty, honesty, and courage, and that the truth she had avoided for so long was finally demanding to be faced, whether she was ready or not. Weeks had passed since the storm of doubt and longing had consumed Clara's heart, and though she tried to distract herself with work, friends, and the familiar routines of life with Ethan, the weight of her choices pressed down on her relentlessly, each memory of Daniel's laughter, each stolen thought of him, mingling with the warmth and quiet love Ethan had always offered, creating a constant ache that left her restless and sleepless, and finally, one evening, she realized that she could no longer carry the burden of secrets and half-truths, that the only way forward was honesty, painful, raw, and unavoidable, so she picked up her phone, hands trembling, and asked Ethan to meet her at their favorite park, the place where they had shared quiet picnics, whispered dreams, and moments that had felt eternal, and as she walked through the familiar paths, leaves crunching softly beneath her feet, heart pounding with fear and hope, she rehearsed what she would say, the confessions that would surely hurt him, the admissions of longing for someone else that she could not deny, yet also the words that spoke of her love, her deep regret, and her desire to make amends, and when she saw him sitting on the worn wooden bench, sunlight filtering through the trees, casting golden patterns on his face, she felt both the sharp sting of guilt and the comforting familiarity of love, and with a deep breath that felt like it could shatter her chest, she sat beside him, voice shaking, and began to speak, telling him everything, the spark she had felt with Daniel, the moments she had lingered in thought, the excitement that had made her question her heart, the lies she had told to protect him and herself, and the deep, aching realization that in seeking something new, she had almost destroyed something she had cherished above all else. And Ethan listened quietly, his hands folded, eyes searching hers, a mixture of hurt, confusion, and patience written clearly on his face. And though the silence between her words was heavy, it was also a testament to the love that had endured countless trials, a love that was not careless, a love that did not vanish at the first storm. And as Clara poured out her heart, tears streaming, she felt both the shame of her mistakes and the fragile hope that honesty could begin to heal. And Ethan, after a long pause, reached for her hand, the warmth of his touch reminding her of every moment they had shared, the strength of a love that had stood the test of time. And he spoke softly, telling her that he appreciated her courage, that the truth, though painful, was the only way forward, and that forgiveness, though not instant, was possible if they both were willing to work through it. And in that moment, Clara realized that love was not just about excitement or fleeting passion, but about trust, understanding, and the willingness to face the consequences of the heart. And as they sat together, the sun dipping lower, casting a golden glow over the park, she felt a tentative sense of relief, the storm in her chest beginning to quiet, replaced by the slow, steady beat of hope, because while the spark she had felt for Daniel had been real, it had also been a lesson, a mirror showing her the depth of the love she had taken for granted. And as she looked at Ethan, seeing the quiet strength and unwavering affection in his gaze, she understood that the journey ahead would not be easy, that rebuilding trust would take time, patience, and countless small acts of honesty and devotion. But for the first time in weeks, she felt certain that it was worth it, that love, in all its complexity, in all its trials, was worth fighting for. And as they walked home together through the park, hands brushing, hearts tentative yet tethered, Clara made a silent vow to never again take for granted the quiet, steadfast love that had always been there, to cherish it, nurture it, and protect it. And though the memory of Daniel's spark would always linger like a soft echo, it no longer controlled her, because she had faced the truth, admitted her mistakes, and chosen the path of honesty and love. And in that choice, she found a kind of freedom, a renewal of the heart. And as the stars began to appear in the evening sky, she knew that while the road ahead would have its challenges, it was a road walked hand in hand, with love, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable. And for Clara, that was more than enough, for it meant that she had learned, in the most difficult way, that love is not only the excitement of desire but the enduring strength of loyalty, the quiet joy of being seen, and the courage to face oneself and another with honesty, tenderness, and hope.